When Roe v. Wade was overturned in June 2022, and despite it being a US Supreme Court decision and the media and left-wing politicians telling us here in New Zealand that we mustn't import American culture wars, the New Zealand media and pro-abortion activists couldn't talk about this decision enough. In fact, in our subsequent analysis of the media coverage for the following 2 weeks, there were an average of almost 10 stories per day in the media. Per day. News articles, op-eds, 135 New Zealand-based media articles and opinion pieces. But what was worse was that across 77 news articles containing at least some commentary, 82% of the total content was pro-abortion. 18% of the total content was pro-life. In other words, 350% more biased towards the pro-abortion position. 50% of all news articles were entirely pro-abortion biased and made no mention of pro-life opinions, no mention, and just 19% of stories might be considered fair coverage of both positions. 61% of the op-eds were pro-abortion biased, with not a single op-ed presenting a pro-life position. The media couldn't talk about it enough, which is interesting because this week we published government data showing that at the very least, one child a month on average is surviving an abortion, a born-alive abortion. But the media have gone deathly silent, and I use that pun deliberately. But we mustn't be silent. Let's check it out. So according to official government data, every month on average, an unborn child is surviving an attempted abortion but is not being given life-sustaining treatment. Now, these shocking numbers may well be underestimated because some DHBs, or districts as they call them now, couldn't or wouldn't provide the data. According to Official Information Act requests to Health New Zealand and was shared with Family First, it reveals that since the beginning of 2020, approximately 80 attempted abortions have resulted in a child being born alive but not given life-sustaining care. Gestation periods range from 20 to 30 weeks. Now, disturbingly, Titai Tokerau district said that life-sustaining care is considered only for wanted babies at 22 weeks and 5 days. At Waikato, there is parental discretion to opt in or opt out of resuscitation. And Canterbury have previously advised that the baby is wrapped in a blanket and held until it passes. So for those who would argue that born-alive abortions don't happen, please explain why DHBs have specific policies for the possibility. Now, I'll come back to some of the other denial arguments that are being put up on this disturbing information that we've released. But what is also concerning is that some larger districts, including Waitemata, Counties Manukau, Bay of Plenty, Waikato, and Capital Coast and Hutt Valley, refused to provide the data. Now, as we say in our media release, we're not surprised by this data, but it is still truly shocking. I mean, whether the unborn child is 15 weeks, 20, 30, 40 weeks in the womb, it will naturally be fighting for its life. That is our human instinct. We should be protecting the lives of innocent babies who survive attempted abortions. We should be making abundantly clear that this is an obligation on medical professionals. Now, Dr. Joanna Howe, you may have heard of her, she's a pro-life activist in Australia, and she has explained one of the examples of how born-alive abortions may happen.
It's Joanna Howe and I'm a professor of law. Today I'm going to describe an abortion by induction. The abortion procedure is performed in a hospital and the abortionist uses an ultrasound to see the baby. The ultrasound is used to obtain a 4-chamber view of the baby's heart and the baby's heart rate is recorded. Given the chance of a live birth following an abortion increases with advancing gestation, abortions at this stage involve feticide. Feticide comes from the Latin stem word side, which means to kill, and fetus, which means child. The purpose of feticide is therefore to kill the child. A long needle is inserted through the mother's abdomen into the uterus. Guided by the ultrasound, the abortionist injects the needle of potassium chloride into the left ventricle of the heart. Following feticide, the mother takes labour-inducing drugs. The mother then goes through labour and delivers her baby stillborn. The dead baby is immediately removed from the room and taken away.
But sometimes the baby survives the attempted abortion. Now, the argument used to minimise this data by the pro-death cult will be twofold, but we must not buy into it. It's similar to the media. They don't want you to hear about it. They don't want to acknowledge it. And pardon the pun again, they don't want to give the issue oxygen. The arguments that are used that you'll hear is, well, it's very, very rare, if at all. And the other argument is, it's only for fetal abnormalities. Now, both are myths. A recent Quebec study, which was a cohort study of almost 14,000 second trimester abortions occurring in hospital settings between 1989 and 2021, so just over a 30-year period in Quebec, Canada, found that among those 14,000 abortions between 15 and 29 weeks of gestation, 11% led to live births. 11%. Fetal anomaly was the indication for termination in just 48% of cases, less than half. 5% were due to maternal emergencies, cases where the mother's life was at risk, but nearly half, 47%, were done for other reasons, personal, social, or simply unspecified. So 1 in 10 in Quebec, and last year in Alberta, it was 1 in 5. So that is not rare in any imagination. And compared with abortion between 15 and 19 weeks, abortion between 20 and 24 weeks, which is what our Official Information Act requests refer to a lot, was associated with 4.8 times the risk of live births. Now, the researchers conclude, and I quote, second trimester abortion carries a risk of live birth, especially at 20 to 24 weeks of gestation, although feticidal injection may protect against this outcome. May. Now, when you're thinking about that 20 to 24 weeks, this shocking data comes at the same time as studies reveal that active treatment and survival rates for babies born at 22 weeks and 23 weeks are increasing. In fact, between 2014 and 2023, survival amongst 22-weekers who received active treatment rose from 25% to 40%. Rates of survival from 7% to 32% for babies born at 22 weeks who didn't even receive active treatment. And a study which has just been published by the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, has revealed that both active medical treatment and the survival rate of babies born as early as 22 weeks is increasing. In fact, Lila Rose's live action organisation, and you might remember we had Lila speak virtually at our conference 2 years ago, the Forum on the Family, they had a recent example that they highlighted, baby Aaron, who was born weighing just 1 pound, 1 ounce at 22 weeks and has beaten the odds and was discharged from a Las Vegas hospital to his home with his mother after spending almost 5 months in the NICU, the intensive care unit for babies, at Sunrise Children's Hospital in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the studies show that skin-to-skin contact, known as kangaroo care, is a vital intervention in the neonatal intensive care unit. Have a watch.
After 350 days fighting for every breath, this is what Gareth and Caroline Golden have been waiting for. Quiet moments with their son at home.
I'm tired.
We'll have to get some pictures of you smiling.
Gabriel James Golden was born at just 22 weeks, weighing 1 pound, 1 ounce, only 11 inches long. Doctors warned the odds of his survival were slim.
When I was 14 weeks pregnant, I unexpectedly started bleeding at church, and we went to the ER and found out that I had something called a subchorionic hematoma.
The hematoma caused Caroline's water to break early. She was admitted to the hospital at 22 weeks gestation.
5 days later, I had an abruption, and this little guy was born, so it's that emergency C-section.
From Jackson, Tennessee to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, well, chances of survival were slim, but there he is. But it's not just New Zealand where there is the problem of born alive abortions. In Australia last year, according to a report in The Australian, a clinical midwife who's worked in maternity and birthing units for about 14 years told a parliamentary hearing in Queensland that some babies born alive after an abortion were never held by their parents, but instead taken out of the room and left to die. Ms. Adsett, who works at a public hospital south of Brisbane, was providing evidence to a Queensland parliamentary inquiry into the Termination of Pregnancy Live Births Amendment Bill 2024. So this was a bill that was basically looking to enshrine legislative protection for babies who were born alive after an abortion. In an emotional statement to the hearing, Ms. Adsett said some midwives were distressed because they were unable to provide any medical care for the baby, but were limited to providing comfort care only, which is merely wrapping and holding the baby, similar to Christchurch. To give you a first example, a mother made a decision to abort a baby at 21 plus weeks gestation. The process began in the morning with misoprostol given throughout the day. The process took all day and the baby was only delivered during the early hours of a night shift where skeleton staff was on duty. This baby moved vigorously, gasped for breath, and had a palpable heart rate to make it clear this baby was alive. It was over 400 grams, but the baby was a good weight. The parents of this baby did not desire to see or hold this baby. Midwives and doctors were left holding this little life while they continued to provide cares for other women who were birthing and welcoming their babies into the world. This baby boy fought for his life for 5 hours before taking his final breath. This is not an uncommon occurrence. Ms. Adsett told the inquiry that she was a conscientious objector when it comes to providing care for women aborting their babies, so she doesn't support the process of abortion, but she said she was happy to make myself available to hold a baby who was born alive after an abortion. These babies deserve better. They deserve to have the same rights that all of us human beings have, she said. And in her submission to the inquiry, University of Adelaide law professor Joanna Howe, I just showed you her video, noted that there had been 328 babies born alive and left to die in Queensland between 2010 and 2020. In fact, even the rabidly left-wing pro-abortion The Guardian had to admit, while trying to downplay the issue, according to the coroner's report, in a small Darwin hospital, a fetus was unexpectedly born alive after a termination. There was confusion over the gestation age. The nurse present didn't know what to do, and the treating doctor did not help her. The nurse wrapped the baby in a warm rug and constantly checked on it, but the coroner heard it would only have had an extremely small chance of survival no matter what. Still had a chance. It died 80 minutes later. The coroner recommended protocols be put in place to prevent the rare event happening again. Another case often mentioned is Xanthi, is that how you say it? A Queensland couple decided to have a termination after they found out their daughter had Down syndrome. The baby was born alive. The father said they were not told and would have wanted to be with her when she died. The case was reportedly being investigated by the Ombudsman, who declined to provide an update. So, in other words, they do happen. In Ireland, an article in the Irish Times entitled "We Need to Have Conversations About Babies Born Alive After Abortion" refers to government reports which show that 84 born alive abortions occurred in the 3 years between 2019 and 2022. And the report says the 2023 three-year review on abortion called for guidelines to be developed on comfort care after a live birth following abortion. In Canada, according to the Canadian Institute for Health Information, which is the federal agency responsible for compiling and reporting standardised health data across Canada, Alberta reported a total of 133 late-term abortions in the 2023-2024 year, so in 1 year. And of those 133 late-term abortions, 28 babies were born alive after the procedure in 1 year. In the United States, according to the ABC, They reported this. The House of Representatives passed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act on Wednesday, 220-210. If approved, the legislation would require health practitioners to care for an infant that is born alive after a failed abortion. In order to become law, the bill would need to be approved in the Senate and signed by President Joe Biden. Well, if he was awake, but he wouldn't sign it anyway. But it didn't get past the Senate, sadly. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democrat, said that the bill is doomed in the Senate and extreme. American women deserve to have the right to their health care protected, not undermined. Note the terminology. Deserve their right to health care. Failing to kill an unborn child can never be called health care. And the article continues, failed abortions where infants are born alive are extremely rare. In Minnesota, which tracks those cases, there were over 10,000 abortions performed in 1 year and 3 cases where an infant was born alive, according to a Department of Health report. Oh, so they do happen. And 1 case is one too many. And this is just one state in the US. In fact, if you go along with the line, they don't happen, you deny the experience of people like Melissa Oden, an abortion survivor who spoke at our forum on the family last year.
I am the survivor of what our world would say is a failed abortion. I'm alive today because an abortion attempt in 1977 failed to end my life. That day I was meant to be delivered as a quote-unquote successful abortion, otherwise known as a deceased child. That is now the day that I celebrate as my birthday. The day that I was accidentally born alive. I didn't know my story though until I was 14 years old. And that day changed my life forever. When I first found out my story at the age of 14, I felt incredibly alone. Over time, I found out that there was one other abortion survivor, and that was Gianna Jessen, and that changed my life. Fast forward over a decade, and I was actually speaking at the March for Life in Canada at the time. And I'll never forget, this young man approached me after the march, and he kind of whispered to me. He said, I'm one of you. I will never forget where we were standing when that conversation occurred. I will never forget him. That really opened my eyes to the fact that not only was I not alone, but people like me are everywhere. We know through statistics from the CDC that they were identifying 400 to 500 live births a year after failed abortions. If we do the math, that becomes 17,855 survivors. I'm on this mission to find those 17,855 other abortion survivors, to heal them, empower them, equip them to find and use their voice. And at the same time, finding and serving those 17,855 families who have been impacted by a failed abortion. Through the Abortion Survivors Network, we've connected with 403 other abortion survivors from 18 different countries, and they range in age from infants to 89 years old. The overarching goal is we want the world to recognize that every human being is more than a choice.
Yeah. And if you've watched the 2011 movie October Baby, it's the story of a woman named Hannah who learns as a young adult that she's survived a failed abortion attempt, and she embarks upon a road trip to understand the circumstances of her birth. Now, the movie was inspired by the life experiences of Gianna Jessen, who Melissa mentioned in that video. Gianna was born after a failed abortion attempt, and she's since campaigned against abortion. She says it's more comfortable for people to think of abortion as a political decision or a right. But I am not a right. I am a human being. As well as that, Rodney Hyde also did a powerful interview on Reality Check Radio last year with a midwife who shares her first-hand account of a late-stage abortion that resulted in a baby being born alive, left without care, taking 2 agonising hours to die. Now, as I said earlier, the arguments are, well, it's very, very rare, if at all, and it's only for fetal abnormalities. Those 2 arguments are complete smokescreens. See through them. Babies are surviving abortions far more often than anyone wants to admit. Now, in 2020, an amendment to the radical and extreme abortion legislation bill of Jacinda Ardern's was introduced by my colleague Simon O'Connor, who was a National MP at the time. And remember that shocking bill that was rammed through Parliament while we were all going into lockdown to protect our most vulnerable fellow human beings from COVID? And meanwhile, our politicians were debating how to liberalise the laws around killing the most vulnerable in our society, the unborn child. Truly shocking. But Simon's amendment clarified that a qualified health practitioner who performed an abortion that results in the birth of a child after an attempted abortion has a duty to provide the child with appropriate medical care and treatment, no different than the duty owed to provide medical care and treatment to any other child born, irrespective of the attempt to abort the child, irrespective of the intent of the abortionist, irrespective of whether the baby was wanted or not, because we are dealing with a human life who is fighting for life. Now, it was only supported by 37 MPs, less than a third. At the time of the debate in Parliament, the then Minister of Health and Labour MP Andrew Little, now the Mayor of Wellington, said, quote, "I would like to see the science about a child being born after an abortion," end quote. Well, here is the evidence. This is not about politics. This is about having a heart. The vote against such a provision was actually just confirmation of how extreme and radical Jacinda Ardern's abortion law was and the agenda of its supporters. Now, based on this disturbing evidence, we're calling on the government to immediately introduce and pass legislation which requires life-sustaining care of any child born alive after an attempted abortion. But most importantly, for those of you watching this, give this issue oxygen, pun intended. If you hear people downplaying the occurrence, show them this episode and point them to the overwhelming research evidence, the international experience, and also the stories, as Melissa Oden refers to. It's no surprise that the media have gone deathly silent. But as William Wilberforce once said, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know. You know, we must speak up for our most vulnerable. We must speak up for the unborn child.